Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Innovative Finance Hangout. I'm Ani Patton-Power, one of your lecturers for the Innovative Finance course, and I'm here to answer some student questions, some frequently asked questions and some questions that are a bit more specific around innovative finance. So I'm going to start out with a question that came from one of your colleagues that is currently completing the course. He had asked about if there were any good examples for cooperatives of farmers coming together, particularly around financing. And it's a very, very good question. I have historically worked with cooperatives of farmers in the US and in Europe. And certainly there are informal cooperatives throughout the continent that have been very successful in credit circles and credit schemes. But this question was particularly around farmers coming together to use innovative financing approaches to be able to access more capital for funding for agriculture. And unfortunately, I don't have an amazing answer for this. There are multiple funds, which we talk about on the course, things like One Acre Fund and others, and that are providing financing and actually creating co-ops within their own funding structures to be able to not only loan capital to, but be able to have equipment and technical assistance. So those are being created by the funder. There are also instances of farming co-ops going from informal co-ops with often with funding from development organizations. Opportunity for financial products that actually work for farming co-ops in rural areas and even in peri-urban areas where there's farming. And there's been development initiatives across the continent to be able to do supply chain funding for farmers, but there is still quite a bit more to do. So I have a few more questions that I can answer, but I see we have a few viewers. So I would love if anyone on the call wants to ask any questions, feel free to ask questions at any time. This is my first Google Hangout that I've ever done live. So I hope that I can figure out how the chat function works. I think can I ask one of my lovely viewers to ask me a question and I can see if I can see it? That would be nice. Because I'm afraid that someone's typing something and I can't see it. Let's see. Can I see it on here? Good thing that we're not calling the course Technology for Impact. All right. Because I'm afraid that someone's typing something and I can't see. Yes. Someone's typing something and I can't see. Yay, I figured it out. I can see your typing. Yes. Jim, go ahead and ask a question. Can I see it on here? Good thing that we're not calling the course Technology for Impact. All right. Because I'm afraid that someone's typing something and I can't see. Oh dear. I don't know how to. Yes. Someone's typing something and I can't see. Yay, I figured it out. I can see your type. There we go. All right. Sorry. All right. So Jim, yes, you can go ahead and ask a question. Or Andreas, you're welcome to ask another question. I think there's a little bit of a delay too. Apologies to everyone on the technology side. I will figure this out more in the future. And apologies to everyone that's watching now that sees me struggling with this in the future. I apologize about that. I'm waiting for someone to ask a question. I'm going to just make up Jim's question, I suppose, that all right. He's typing his question now. I feel like I should have some music in the background. No pressure, Jim. All right, while we're waiting for Jim's question, I thought I would mention that we have a few resources that we've shared throughout the course, including the Impact Alpha email, which hopefully most of you are receiving. But the GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network, has just come out with 2 new reports, one looking at exits. That's actually very interesting within impact investing. How do you exit investments? And that is a great, okay. I don't think Jim is a real person. He's not asking a real question. All right, I'm going to go back to my prepared questions that people have sent in asking about the course. So one of the questions that we often get, and it was sent in this time too, is what next? So you've completed the course and you have worked on your issue and you have your strategy. What are the next steps? And it's a tough question because there are a lot of different issues that you're working on, and I really appreciate that the variety of issues that I see on the course and that I work with the students throughout the work, as well as with the clients that I work with on a regular basis. But generally, one of the first steps for your next step is just to go out and start having the conversations that you need to have. So figuring out who is doing similar things in the area, figuring out, as we talk about with the solutions and the problem landscape, so actually putting that to work. The way we've designed the course is to be able to take what you've done, your strategy, and put it to work. And I think that's something that hopefully comes through and you are able to do next. There are many opportunities actually for funding to be able to do the actual strategy work for the innovative financing piece. One of the things that people don't often realize is that the work that goes into designing the financing strategy or the funding strategy can be very intensive. There are intermediaries around the world that actually have consulting firms that work on this. So these are organizations that are working hard to be able to create the types of products and the funding solutions that you need to be able to have examples like we have. And these are funded. So it's one thing to think about if you're an organization and you're interested in doing something new and different, actually going out to find funding to design something. And you'll see this in calls for proposals from organizations like development finance institutions. Convergence, which we talked about on the course, is another one that actually pays for individuals or organizations to have to do work in this area, to design new funding ideas. Nonprofits are also, well, funders of nonprofits, so foundations are another place to look at funding. So actually going to a current funder and asking them to fund your the strategy, your new strategy process that you're embarking on is another option. So particularly if you've been speaking to your funders about sustainability, or if you have a new idea that requires a new type of funding approach, looking at funders themselves for funding to be able to do this first piece, this actual how do you build this innovative financing strategy, is totally valid. And this kind of pre-proposal / proposal phase is something that the work is, as you can see from the course, quite intense and requires a lot of resources. So if you're doing that work outside of an organization, it is very valid for you to look at actually getting funding for that work that you're doing. Introduce myself and where I'm from. Thank you for that question. So as I said, my name is Ani. I am originally from the United States. I grew up in the state of Minnesota. I then, after college, decided to become an investment banker. which at the time, pre-financial crisis, was something that a lot of people did. And, you know, I learned a lot of skills in investment banking, and I know some of you are investment bankers. And it's something that is definitely very technical and can be very interesting. But I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't creating value for society. At the time, I was specializing in taking education companies that were for-profit education companies, public and private, and raising large amounts of public capital for them. And I realized that these companies were just actually not good companies and were not having good social outcomes. And I felt my part that I was playing in that was not true and actually not ethical. So I quit my job and actually went on a large trip and ended up spending a couple of years in India working with a investment bank for social enterprises. That was the first investment bank for social enterprises that was created. It's called Unitas Capital. And after that, I went and did my MBA at the University of Oxford, and I worked for a bit in Ghana, and then ended up working for Oxford, and then also for the University of Cape Town, and have focused since the time when I was in India on innovative financing. So I think one of the things about innovative financing that really inspired me, even though it really wasn't a term when I started out 8 years ago, was the idea that finance could be an enabler of social impact. And, you know, 8 years ago, we had a really good idea that social enterprises, this new business model, was very interesting and could, you know, use business acumen to address social issues. But the financing was still just, you know, traditional financing. And I think there was a whole group of us that have been for years saying, but the financing should actually be very tailored to the solution as well. And so it's been really fun, I think. I mean, it's been a lot of hard work over the past 8 years of building this up and working with organizations and funders to look at how it is that you can create financing that actually enables and that doesn't cause social enterprises or projects to have to make kind of short-term sacrifices or long-term sacrifices for the sake of short-term funding. And I think that the nice thing now is that there's more organizations that are interested in how do they do that themselves, as well as organizations that are interested in actually raising the funding. So looking at both funders as well as fundees. And so that's how I came to do this. And I lecture at the University of Cape Town, which is where I am right now, Cape Town, and then at the University of Oxford. And then I'm on my way up to the London School of Economics next month to do my first couple of courses there. And that's going to be really interesting with their public school masters in public administration. Interesting project I was working on in India. That's a really good question. So I got to India and the microfinance market crashed. Literally like a month after I moved there. And it was chaos, absolutely positive chaos. So the company I was working for was essentially an investment bank for microfinance organizations at the time, and they were interested in doing investment banking for social enterprises, but it wasn't really enough of a market yet. So it was a good timing for me to come in and be able to do the social enterprise funding work. But so the crash necessitated, you know, really pushing into social enterprise funding. And so going out and hitting the pavements and finding social enterprises, particularly ones that were looking to raise between $1 and $5 million US, was actually really difficult. So it was tough. I mean, there were social enterprises out there and ones that wanted to raise that much money, but actually finding individuals that were capable of running organizations that could use $1 to $5 million well. So some of my favorite ones that we worked with, it's tough. We did some really interesting stuff in renewables. So looking at particularly in energy efficiency, looking at how to do most effectively do solar ATMs. And that was a really interesting project deal. One of my favorite companies, though, was this amazing outsourcing company that only hired people that were deaf or dumb or blind, deaf, dumb, or blind. And what they did was they said, we believe that there are special skills that these individuals have, particularly around outsourcing. So, for instance, people that are deaf have attention to detail and ability to focus, and they were able to do data entry actually at a higher level than other individuals, which was really interesting. And people that were blind had a really good sense of hearing and were able to do transcription at really high levels. And I think that this was something that they came across, and they built this really interesting outsourcing company, and then did put the actual individual outsourcing companies or outlets in peri-urban and semi-rural areas. And for the first time, a lot of these people were able to actually, earn a living for their families. And they had 99% retention rates, which was amazing. Oh no, I'm running out of battery. And so I loved that fun firm. We raised a couple $1 million for them, and they were an incredible firm. Just plugging in here. All right, let's see. Scalable impact requires systems change. Financing for systems change is scarce as the complexity of designing and activating change in ecosystems. Oof, Kirk, that is a very, very good question. So we recently done a set of, sorry, that light is very bright. We recently done a set of cases around systems change, not necessarily with funding, but around how do you do systems change. And I think figuring out how to get funding for systems change is something that is extremely difficult. One of the things that is, I think, a possible avenue looking at systems change funding is finding funders that are aligned to the final purpose, that can see long term, and then being able to sketch out milestones and small to medium term funding options. Systems change funding that is not grants is something that is very difficult. I'm looking forward to finding, seeing more options that people do and do well. There's things like humanitarian aid that people are trying to change how humanitarian aid is actually dispersed. Things like health systems, working with organizations that are actually working with governments, and finding the correct funding to be able to do that. Finding the buy-in from health systems. We've worked with Johnson & Johnson around health systems in South Africa, because they are bought in and very interested in the health system in South Africa, and are willing to actually pay for systems work in South Africa. But it's a difficult process. Does the Bertha Center have resources to provide guidance on an ongoing basis? That's actually a very good question too. We've looked at in the past figuring out how to do a light touch approach, because we obviously have hundreds of organizations that get in contact with us, and it's very difficult to do one-on-one mentoring, just because we're a small center and we're project funded ourselves, so it can be very difficult. Right now, the best that we have is our pathways to funding and our mentors. But we've been looking at rolling out some mentor processes, or some facilitated mentorship through the pathways to funding. So what I would suggest you do is sign up for. If you go and search Pathways to Funding, which is our annual event for entrepreneurs, there's a newsletter that comes out of that, and it's going to be talking about some of the things that we're doing there. And you can contact my colleagues that run that. And we've been playing around with the idea of doing a workshop for organizations. But it's it's tough to figure out how to do that type of one-on-one work. Current opinion. Does anyone know how to kick someone off of this chat? This person is obviously being very, I don't know how to, does anyone know how to, oh wait, participants, let's see. I don't know if anyone knows how to kick someone off of a chat, and you can let me know, that would be great, because obviously there's just a troll on here that's just doing things, and I don't know enough about how to do it, how to do this to kick someone off. Fareed, current opinion of Bitcoin and how it contributes to the overall economy. So I'm actually doing quite a lot of work around blockchain and artificial intelligence right now, and it's a great question on how does Bitcoin actually affect the economy, and particularly the social financing piece. So I personally have a lot of respect for the people that are creating new blockchains and new cryptocurrencies. And from my interactions with a lot of them, there's a real want and a desire to actually transform and change the system and change how how capital is distributed, how the actual financial systems are set up. And I think that one of the things around using blockchain for impact measurement is going to be absolutely, just revolutionary. So being able to have an impact ledger that is a global impact ledger, whereby impact information that is being compiled by all different types of organizations, that is being put up, that's not even being compiled right now, to be able to access and then be able to third-party verify, will create opportunities to build financial products off of that data, so that you can have funders saying, I would like to fund 800 women going to school, going to tertiary education from this part of rural Tanzania. And you can have then organizations that will go out and help find those women, and then be able to get them funding from that request, and potentially have a finder's fee associated with it that actually helps organizations run. So you can imagine where organizations and individuals can put out impact calls and be willing to pay for impact, and that be done completely electronically without having to have organizations apply and do log frames and all of the things that those of you that are nonprofits know how to do well, but that are just very, very time consuming. So actually, looking at impact and outcomes and paying off of that point. Now, your actual point around Bitcoin, so does it contribute to the economy? I think we are at the stage now, the very early stages of cryptocurrency, where if you look at how markets form, the earliest piece of market formation is chaos. And that is absolutely where we are. So how Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are actually affecting financial systems is actually not through, I think, their own market value. It's actually through the underlying blockchain that they are convincing financial institutions through this large market cap that it is the future of how financial systems work. So that's where I'm seeing the impact. As far as how it's going to affect the economy, right now there's a lot of very wealthy 22 and 23-year-olds. And actually, that's some of the people that I'm interacting with that want to do really good things for the world, because they're millennials and they see a lot of issues that they'd like to try and help solve. So how that ends up, we will see. But the possibility of doing what are called initial coin offerings, or ICOs, where you raise funding like an IPO, but on Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, I think is a possibility of using ICOs for social enterprises and even for nonprofits is huge. And I think that it's going to take a while for that to become mainstream, but there's a lot of options. And I think that'll be an innovative financing mechanism that will potentially allow organizations that are trying to do really big things be able to attract the type of funding that they need in a short period of time, instead of the standard kind of financing process. human greed is fueling crypto is not fundamental. I agree, Kirk. It is right now. The underlying is absolutely people trying to figure out, trying to not be lost in the next thing. All right, go to channel. All right, someone's telling me how to kick someone off. Thank you. Go to his channel top right. Okay. Okay, I don't know how to go to his channel. I'll try my best. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask now. This is the thing with technology, right? You have wonderful things that you can do, and then you also have trolls. Uncle Jim, I have no idea why you are on this thing, but hover over his name. Okay, thank you for who. I'm trying to hover. Okay, yes. All right. I apologize to everyone. Okay, there we go. All right. I have just removed the message. There we go. Okay, I have put the user in timeout. Thank you. I put him in timeout for 300 seconds, so I can do that again. Sorry for those of you that are watching that are not live, and also those of you that are watching that's not interesting at all. So yes, I agree. I agree, Kirk. I think blockchain is the future, whether it's in the form of cryptocurrencies or whether it's actually going to be utilizing blockchain for management of land deeds. And all of the interesting things that social enterprises are doing with blockchains. I think the thing to remember for those of you that are not familiar with blockchain, the thing to remember about blockchain is that it's very transparent, and it allows transactions to be compiled on a global ledger as opposed to in one place. And this is interesting when you're thinking about a nonprofit or a social enterprise is that you don't have, no matter what you're trying to do, it's global and it's public, and there's some accountability potentially that can be built in. It's not going to fix everything, but I mean, I think that most of us can agree probably that are on this hangout and the course that the financial system has not worked for everyone. So, rebuilding it, as opposed to just adapting it, does seem like potentially it does seem like potentially it's the way to go. And yes, and Kirk, absolutely, identity is an interesting piece of this. So one of the companies that I'm working with was talking about how using Facebook for some of the pieces that they're doing around raising capital and blockchain is important, because on Facebook, you've created an identity, and it actually is very difficult to then cheat the system based off of not having an identity. So you can normally trust the identity of Facebook. So, all right, what other questions do we have around financing? Does anyone want to ask me a question about the projects that they're working on? I know there's some amazing projects that I've been absolutely completely amazed. Oh wait, sorry, I see another one that I've missed actually in all of our wondering about kicking this guy out. Tor, raising a question around the right mix between foreign and local investment capital. African countries are continuously experiencing an increasing influx of investment capital, but mobilizing local investment can be a challenge. Tor, I couldn't agree more. If you look at the mission statement, actually, the Innovative Financing Initiative that I started at the Bertha Center 4.5 years ago, that was actually in our mission statement, was to catalyze local capital for impact across the continent. So, I mean, I think the thing is when, unfortunately, with capital, there is a power dynamic. So when you have capital coming from, outside wherever community you're talking about, it does set up a power dynamic, and there is a sense of being able to dictate. And I think that one of the things around having more local capital that is directing impact capital across the continent of Africa and the global South is that it will become more inclusive is the goal. And just having local capital doesn't make it more inclusive, but having local capital that understands local issues means you have one less step to take when you're doing your problem landscape. And when you look at one of my favorite papers on inclusivity is by a professor named Heeks. And he includes something that I call the Heeks ladder. So it's a ladder of inclusivity. And you start out with intention, and you progress up the ladder around actually including the individuals that you are designing with, as opposed to for, in the design process, in the decision process. And so if you are working with local capital that has the lived experience of some of the issues you're trying to solve, you have one less step to figuring out the root cause of those issues, because the individuals actually working with that capital are familiar enough to be able to look within their own networks and within their own experience to be able to comment on some of these issues. And there's also a thing around the profits, right? So Muhammad Yunus says that, the profits of social business should always just go back to the community, not to investors. And I don't agree with that, even though I am a huge fan of his work. But we do have to be careful that this isn't about impact investors coming from other places, making money and creating value in places, but then taking the capital back out, 100% of the capital back out. So having local partners that are placing impact capital, and also having crowdfunding and democratization of capital, where if there are gains and there's value created from a capital perspective, that it's not all, again, concentrated in one place, that there's the possibility that that capital then is returning to the community, not just in creating, healthcare systems and education systems and other things that things we're investing in, but also then being actually owned and earned by the communities themselves. So the right mix, I don't know. I wish that I knew, but I'm not sure. So, but there's, but I think that the mix is more local than it is right now. That would be what I would say. Kirk, in South Africa, it seems the momentum for redesigning impact and building sizable solutions is increasing, but funders are focused on single product solutions. How do we drive the awareness for system-based programs rather than an app to sell financial products, the base of the pyramid? We need more patient capital and larger grant-based funding. So Kirk, you're answering your own question. We need more patient capital and larger grant-based funding to initiate the system to move. Yeah, I agree. So I think, and I say this in the course, but if I had a dollar, euro, rand, pound for every time a funder told me they wanted that one fast scaling app, then what I would have, I'd have many rands and pounds. And I think that one of the things that we both need organizations to be funded that are, slow moving but impactful, and also the systems change piece. And I don't know, I agree with Tor saying he doesn't, not sure if we need more grant-based funding. How do we do more systems change funding again? I'm happy to hear from you as well. I think that there's historically, systems change work has been very grant funded. So I think that some of the solution lies there, but I think that there is a possibility to create medium-term outputs for systems change funding that doesn't necessarily need grant funding. So linking it to corporates and to other entities that are actually benefit from a systems change. And I think that's where figuring out how do we create medium-term outputs, and how do we measure? And this is always an issue. How do you measure systems change? What if you're trying to move an entire system? If you're trying to change an entire healthcare system, how do you measure wins? And I think identifying some of those wins and then putting capital and realizing who wins from those wins. So what organizations and entities will benefit from having the system pushed in one direction, and then figuring out how to monetize that. And some of it might be credit models that are different, patient capital. Some of it will be funders that are just there for the long term. Those don't have to be grant funders. So very long-term organizations like pension funds have very low risk appetite. So it'll be, how do you actually structure vehicles where you have long-term funders that are willing to be in those vehicles, but you might have to have other funders that are de-risking those products to be able to continue to do the work around systems change or around long-term investments in social infrastructure and other things that are necessary to be able to do systems change. The other thing to think about systems change is there are different types of systems. There are traditional systems like healthcare and education. And then there are, systems like, as I mentioned before, humanitarian aid. And changing some of these systems will benefit people, others will lose. But figuring out how to make that more short-term, I think, and figuring out how to gauge success, even though that's very difficult, but figuring that out, I think that's part of the challenge, but also part of the opportunity. And I think the increasing data-centric of where we are headed as a world may help. That's at least my thought. So, if you're able to measure how many people are voting on resolutions that you're putting forward, if you're, an activist financier and you're going around and you're working on resolutions around shareholder activism, around resolutions around oil and gas, and you can start to measure, how many people are voting on them, what you're doing, how it's moving. You can start to look at how it's actually moving big companies to take action. And I think then you can start to say, well, listen, who else is benefiting from this? Shareholders are benefiting from this. How do we monetize it? All right. Davos is talking the right game, but how do we take the story to the street and build momentum in industry and business? Well, that goes back to what we were talking about before. We distribute it. And that's where things like blockchain and crowdfunding and retail impact finance, so allowing individuals like ourselves to put our money where our mouth is very interesting. So a friend of mine works for an organization in the States called Wealthsimple. And she said when they created their portfolio, so it's an app where you can invest your money sustainably or responsibly. It's an app where you can invest your money. They created a portfolio to be able to invest sustainably as one of their options. And they thought it was going to be a small uptake, 10, 15% of their individuals that were signing up. And what's actually happened is it's closer to 60 to 70% of the individuals signing up for the app are using the sustainable option. So that's where, and Kirk, to your question around South Africa, how do we change the system? Well, the individuals stand up within the system and make the financial institutions actually act on our behalf as opposed to on a small number of shareholders' behalf. And I think we've seen that in some of the recent scandals. But the idea of allowing individuals in charge to change the system, I don't think it's going to work. So it's going to take individuals that are committed to changing the system, that may be outside of the system, may not be in the system yet, may not have power in the system, but being able to take matters into their own hands, whether that's through shareholder activism or how money is invested, or advocacy, or just creating new business models and new financing that doesn't need the system, the traditional system, where we're going. We can't expose all. I don't understand big hit badness. I don't quite get it. I'm sure that it's a great point though, Kirk. Big hit badness. I'm not sure what that means. But all right. So, are there any other questions from the audience before we wrap this up? Not audience, the students that are interested in or are taking the course. I'm assuming some of you have already taken the course, which hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you've finished your assignments. No other questions. Kirk, I do agree. We can't rely on exposure to drive all the momentum. Individuals have to stand up and actually do things. All right. I think, unless there's any other questions, then I think we'll wrap this up. It's been very cool getting to do. Oh wait, one final question. All right, Navish, go ahead. Navish, I'm not sure how to say that. Go ahead, Navish. What is your question? I think there's a little bit of a delay. So I think I have to wait for Nivish's question. But also just to say while we're waiting for the question that we will do another one of these in a month or so. And so if you have more questions, and then you're also welcome to, in the discussion forums, I've been trying to go in and answer as many questions as possible. So please feel free to leave messages in the discussion forum, and also to email them to the MOOC email address that was in the email here that was sent out for this chat, and then we'll compile those for the next session, or to leave them in the discussion forums to see if your peers also have answers. Obviously, there are so many people taking this course that have such incredible experience. So, I need to figure out a way to have all of you appear instead of just me, with the experience that I have, but I build off of all of yours. Tor, I totally agree with you. Capital is plenty. I completely agree. That's how I normally start most of my talks. There's too much money out there. Startups need smart capital plus contracts plus insights. I think we need to assume more responsibility moving forward. Tor, I completely agree. I think part of it is that that there's a need for all of the responsibility to be taken, and for investors to figure out how to do, whether it's through mentoring or to figure out how to do better hands-on investment. And to Kirk, I have just remodeled my house. That's why I don't have a lampshade. Actually, there's a lot of things that I don't have. So you can see there's nothing on the walls either. So there's many things that are not in my house. There's actually like stuff in packaging over on the other side. All right, so Nivish, I'm going to go with yours. Oh, and Tor also mentioned around that then affording to establish angel investment syndicates. Yeah, and I think, Tor, the thing is too, is it'd be great if we can better harness those skills that people have, even if they don't have large amounts of capital. And I think that's part of this democratization piece. So you might have people around the table that have don't have $3 million to put into investments, but they have the ability and the willingness to spend a few hours of time helping someone code or market or brand design or different pieces. And so there's been some interesting organizations that have tried to pull that together. And I think we're going to need to continue to do that, because no single organization or single investor can be able to actually provide all of the advice that is needed to organizations to be able to grow, whether they're small or big, but to be able to continue to grow. So Nivish, thank you so much for your question. Something wasn't too detailed in the course was the mismatch between impact funders and existing SMEs or social enterprises. We need some more insight into solving the mismatch. I think we actually all do. So one of the things actually that we've just been talking about, I think of it as that mismatch. So, how do I think it's a bit about education on both sides. So it's about funders understanding the innovative financing principles of actually designing capital for the needs. So not just saying, listen, this is what we got, $3 million equity checks, and going out to the market and looking for that, because that might not actually be what the market needs. So there's that kind of that education side, and understanding that funders might need to actually pair up with multiple funders to be able to provide the types of capital that are actually needed, or the funders might need to figure out how to help downstream actually get the ideas and the companies ready to them. And then the other thing about that is the education on the actual organization side. So obviously there's a lot of investment readiness that is needed. But that's, that being done in a better way that is more time efficient, what we were just talking about, where there's, just better opportunities for individuals and organizations to tap into what is needed so that they can actually be, investment ready. But it's yin and yang. So, there's no one point at which a company is investment ready. And there's no one point at which, there's the right type of capital. So I think the co-creation process around this is something that is messy and it's tough. And, it's something that is, not very easy to put on a balance sheet and an income statement. And I think that one of the things that we'll have to continue to do is actually have funders interacting with enterprises and continuing to figure out how they can use their resources in a way that empowers the enterprises. And it's going to take them listening. It's also going to take organizations listening and realizing that they should be not doing this on their own. They should actually be working with an organization that's already doing something very similar. The idea of mergers in social enterprises and nonprofits is something that I think we don't see enough of. There doesn't need to be 10,000 of one type of organization, and Nivesh, you're saying now too that the LP's requirements aren't necessarily controllable. Pooling of finance is great, but you don't see it. So pooling of blended finance. So LPs are limited partners. So yeah, agreed. No, and so that's where Nivesh, it goes all the way up. So having limited partners understand that they're going to need to be funding or need to be spreading their portfolio across a bunch of different areas, and different funders that are sitting across those spectrums are going to need to come together. Whenever we do research in a specific area, the thing that always comes out is it's not that there's not enough capital, it's not that there's not enough ideas, it's about the collaboration, it's about the coordination. So, when you dive into an area and you all of a sudden you see all these opportunities, and then you meet someone that has been, wandering around in the desert, doesn't know about these opportunities for funding. And then the same thing with funders. I was on the phone today with someone that has a $300 million fund that they cannot find the right water and sanitation water and sanitation opportunities to fund. And they've been looking for months. And, there's the information asymmetry. So one of the things I would love to create in using artificial intelligence, or something I'm working on now, are bots that actually go out and they find organizations that actually that need the funding that you potentially have, or some funding that you have, and actually bring those to you. And not by someone filling out a form, but actually going through, looking at information, looking at community newspapers that are in a different language, looking at organizations being spotlighted on something on the radio. So actually the idea of, can we use artificial intelligence and different types of technology to fix that information asymmetry, so that you can have funders that are then working with, information could potentially be used to pull different funders together, and then using those funders, different types of capital, actually find organizations that work for that blend of funders' capital, and having funders willing to work with different organizations and build, potentially flexible, really innovative mechanisms that are not necessarily funds. So they're not necessarily a fund with a set of LPs, that the money has to be invested by a certain period of time and has to be invested in a specific way. So I think the future of this is more flexible, it's more co-created, and it's going to use a lot of technology to figure out how that capital is allocated, and how those individuals are assessed on that capital allocation. And then let's see, Kirk, great example, the app for small growers in Kenya to get real-time crop pricing. So that is quite cool. Safaricom, took the mobile connectivity to the grower regions, and then individuals could build off of that. So I think that it takes its different periods of time and different pieces of the puzzle that are solved by different types of funders. And so I think more coordination around that, Nivesh, and that's tough. Coordination is difficult. Finding a way that you can actually pool. You can actually pool investors together. That's like syndication with technology. And so, Nivesh, to your point, a tool that pools investors, it would be incredible. I mean, there's obviously lots of networks that investors belong to, and some of those use different types of technology. But I think there's a real there's a way in which you could, as an investor, log onto your computer in the morning and have, instead of Facebook requests, have impact booked requests. I mean, totally making this up, right? None of this is actually happening, and I'm not doing this right now. But ways in which it says you should connect with this funder and look at this deal together, because the types of capital you have are really well aligned, and this deal and this deal needs this consultant to be able to work with them to be able to get them to the point where they would be ready for your capital. So do you want to sponsor this consultant? Do you want to sponsor 3 days of this consultant out of your technical assistance budget to be able to work with this startup so that they can pitch to you? Imagine something like that. It would be, I mean, it'd be amazing, because instead of that social entrepreneur having to try and figure out who to pitch to, how do they get the help that they need, you could actually have artificial intelligence, actually looking at and assessing the situation and actually finding potentially the best alternatives for them. And also having things like being able to upload pitch decks and having artificial intelligence comment on them. That's very interesting. So, Tor, you've asked about my project. So, my project is evolving. So the idea really was starting out last year to figure out how and even what were the possibilities of artificial intelligence within the impact space, particularly impact investing, innovative financing. And so I spent quite a bit of time collecting questions, interacting with technology experts across the world, some that were in impact, but most that were just the technology. And I think that I was working with a local startup here, and kind of building a prototype, and we built a prototype, and it kind of worked, but it still had a long ways to go. And so I created a database of about 80,000 pages of impact reports to teach the protocol, essentially. So I called her a she, and so. That's where that one started and stopped, and I kind of got to the point where it was going to take a lot of capital to get it to the next stage, and I wasn't clear that it was necessarily the right thing to get to the next stage. And so what I've done is I've taken a step back from that, and I'm now working as an advisor to 3 different kind of artificial intelligence blockchain companies, and will then be, as they grow and as I'm helping them grow, they have said they will probably work together, and then also to build out, they will allow me resources, once they build up their teams a little bit bigger, to be able to start creating some of these bots that I've been talking about. And I'm also convening a couple of events around blockchain and artificial intelligence and AI and impact. So just really trying to, make sure that I'm in the space where, people are talking and doing about this. I have no background in building AI protocols, so I will not be doing the backend technology work. But really the way in which I'm spending some of my time is to try and help individuals that do have that knowledge and that ability really think deeply about how they build that impact architecture, so that it's not an afterthought, but it's actually the key component, and then thinking about how we build the next set of really groundbreaking technology for designed specifically for impact, not designed for corporates and adapted for impact, but designed ground up for impact. And so, so I'm getting at it from that. It's been an interesting journey. So the nice part about being a quasi-academic / consultant / whatever startup is that I can design my own time. And so I've been spending a chunk of time on that, and I'm really learning a lot about what's the possibility. So a couple of questions, a couple more comments here. Looking at AI on the ground to learn from people, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the thing, is if we have more data that we're able to learn from, hopefully the scary thing about AI is that, it will perpetuate, stereotypes and, if it learns from bad data. So hopefully it's going to be learning from good data. And Tor, to your point completely, there's still a piece that's personal. So if you notice when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about linking things, not about necessarily the artificial intelligence doing the investing. And I think it's a huge point. So I think there's, where the computer, and it comes in handy, whether it's blockchain or impact or AI, is that, it's able to take huge amounts of information and distill it. It's not good at being creative, and it's not good at thinking of solutions that aren't in the data. the personal piece around this still continues to come in is we need human brains to think up new things, things that have never been done, understand how to empathize with people, actually, walk people through things that are not just analytical. And so I still think there's a huge piece around investing that will be personal, but I think that the piece around the mismatch, going back, Nivesh, to your point, the piece around the mismatch and the distribution can be more effectively solved potentially by technology. The actual scaling and growing of businesses, there will be tools, but I couldn't agree more that it's still going to be personal, and there's still going to be a piece around having really good investors that are able to identify organizations and be able to invest in them, both from a capital perspective as well as from an individual perspective. Kirk has said that we need to build the system and the tech to drive the society access and then learn from it. So I think it's circular. So it's continuing to be using the technology to be able to better refine and hone what we can do as individuals, and being able to amplify, the impact that we can have, and that other organizations can use. That's my own opinion, and that's what I see being really exciting in all of this. So being able to use more data to be able to create better financial instruments that are able to create more impact and better allocate capital is, the end goal is obviously the impact from that capital allocation. And so that's the goal, is to be able to amplify that with the technology, not the technology itself. The technology is a means to an end of the actual impact on human beings, at least from my perspective. And that's kind of the perspective that I'm working from. All right. Okay, wait, sorry, one more from Tor, and then then I'm going to actually close this off. The mismatch is to some extent caused by the hype from outside, and impact funds are popping up, but what value do they contribute? Yeah, I mean, again, and I think hopefully you all got this in the course, but it is not about not having enough money. That's really not the problem. And so I think having more impact funds is good on some hands because they become more specialized. So, they're looking at not just being a traditional big impact fund, but looking at specifically at water sanitation in Southeast Asia, specifically at, gender lens investing in Eastern Europe. And I think that for me is the more specialized they get, the more potential value they can add to, whether it's whatever type of investments they're doing. And then also I think pushing the boundaries of, traditional capital. So, what does it mean to be traditional capital? Like, why are you not having an impact? Are you, what are the things that differentiate you, and why? So why are you choosing not to be impact? And so I think hopefully my goal, my hope is that the question becomes, why not? Not, oh, well, why are you an impact investor? But why not? Why aren't you tracking your impact? Why aren't you tracking what you're doing to inequality? Why aren't you tracking what you're doing to women's rights? Why aren't you tracking that as an investor? And I think that would be, for me, the hope, more than just adding more funding, but actually adding smart capital to the equation, and organizations and individuals that are actually tracking and monitoring and making decisions based off of that data that is not just purely financial data. And understanding how to do that is obviously something that will come over time. You are welcome, Nivesh. Tor, I hope you enjoyed the course. Questions, guys, I really appreciate it. This was really fun. I was not sure exactly what to expect, and obviously we had a few hiccups, but now I know how to block someone, and I know that my computer dies very quickly when I'm doing Google Hangouts. But I'm very much online, and Twitter, LinkedIn. So please feel free to give me a shout, and then I hope you all have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, and do enjoy the course if you're still about to go on it. So, and Kirk is apparently on a plane. So Kirk, have a great flight. Thanks to the rest of you for joining, and for those of you that are watching the replay of this, I hope it has been useful. Thanks so much.